I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we'll break down the latest news from Billy Napier about the offensive coordinator position. Bill Carr and Alonzo Johnson, two giants from the 1980s, passed away this week. We'll talk a little bit about their time at the University of Florida. The Big Ten and SEC are forming an alliance. Where does that sound familiar, Will? And then the Dartmouth men's basketball team uh, was ruled by the National Labor Board to be employees of a university. There are some distinctions there with it being a private school versus a public entity, and we'll get into some of that to close out the show. So, for those of you who are really fired up about the National Labor Board, will be sure to stick around to the other show. But it does have it could have consequences beyond the Ivy Leagues, and we're seeing Tennessee and Virginia locked in a court battle with the NCAA right now. So it's interesting to see what direction the NCAA is headed here, and that could have an impact. Will, before we dive in, everybody get used to hearing about the magazine between now and the month of June or July, maybe August, just the rest of the off season. Tell us about the magazine, Will.
Yeah, man, we got the 2024 Read and Reaction Preview Magazine. Everybody saw a couple years ago we had a digital-only version. Last year, we released a hard copy version. We're doing that again this year, but we're going to be doing it a little bit differently. We're hoping to get it distributed down there in Florida in stores like Walmart, CVS, Publix, that sort of stuff. 1,000 different stores is what we're aiming for, but we need some sponsors to help us pull that off. So we're looking for people to come and sponsor the magazine. We've got a media kit we can send it your way with pricing. Help us out now. The goal overall is to start sort of chaining these together, to have a Florida Read and Reaction magazine, and then eventually expand to the other programs as well. Really, all the Power Five programs, though there's not really a Power Five anymore, but all the alliance programs as the dust settles. And look, if you liked it last year, awesome. Show it to somebody who's got a business, and if you need us to show it to us, let us know. And if you've got a business, we'd love to hear from you. I think one of the cool parts is we're a small business. We have the ability to sort of mix and match to make sure something meets your needs. So reach out, and we'll make sure it's a win-win. The last thing we want to do is have you advertise and it not be a win for you. So reach out to us, and we'll make sure that it's a win, and hopefully a win for us too.
I heard on Andy Staples the other day, they're calling it the Core Four. The Core Four instead of the Power Five.
Isn't that like the Yankees? Didn't they call them the Core Four with Jeter and Posada and those guys?
Yeah, he put that out. He put that out on Twitter. I think he said that was a poll, and that's what came back. The Core Four. We'll see how long the ACC is standing, and this Big Ten SEC alliance. Who knows? Who knows?
It's just all going to eventually be called the SEC. So let's just do it that way.
Well, Billy Napier, we're recording this show on Wednesday night. Billy Napier did have a press conference in Gainesville for National Signing Day. We've talked about a lot of the players that are coming in, though. So the interesting observation that you had made from the press conference is that there was a signal that no external offensive coordinator would be on the way. There was some talk about potentially Russ Callaway, the tight ends coach, the young tight ends coach, who people are very high on. There's some talk about him getting more responsibilities, but there was not really any real detail provided by Billy Napier. And I think he indicated that he intends to take that into the spring. But from my personal vantage point, I would love to see a coach on the staff step up and take over as much of the play calling duty as possible, give Billy Napier really the ability to just have that 360-degree angle on game days and not be so locked in on the play sheet. But that's my opinion, Will.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked last week about the special teams coach not being on the field, and that was an area of contention for you, not having him on the field. Napier believes in having two offensive line coaches. That's the way he's done it. He thinks there's an advantage there. Giving up that responsibility to Callaway, they talked a little bit about that today. But look, the offensive coordinator, what you'll hear, and I heard this today when I posted something on Facebook or on X about my opinion on this, is that Napier's doubling down on what he believes, and whether you agree with what he believes or not, I do think you have to respect the fact that he's going with what he believes in. Now, what that also means is that if it doesn't work out, then it falls on him, right? Because he's the one who's executed this vision. And if the vision is a mess, well, then Napier's the one who gets the blame. But that does mean that if the vision's successful, then we need to give them a lot of credit. So if Florida's got a top 20 offense this year, then we need to sit here and say, look, we were wrong about needing an outside voice to make changes. The other thing he said during the press conference today is that Ron Roberts is going to sort of be almost the de facto defensive coordinator, and that Austin Armstrong is going to call the plays, but there's going to be an awful lot of input from Roberts in terms of what's going on. I'm fascinated to see what happens with that, because now you've got sort of two voices in the room. How are they going to work together? How is that going to mesh? And beyond that, look, coaches are guys who have egos, and so one of the reasons I think Napier is hesitant to give up play calling is he likes having the play calling, not just because of his ego, but because it sort of keeps him engaged with what's going on a day-to-day basis. I'm fascinated to see what happens with Roberts and what happens with Armstrong as well, because again, coaches have egos, coaches want to be promoted, coaches want to be able to take the credit for turning something around. If this defense all of a sudden becomes good, Roberts is the guy who's going to get the credit. Now, I'm not sure Florida fans care who gets the credit, but does Austin Armstrong care who gets the credit? And that's going to be one of the sort of one of the headlines, I think, throughout the year, given what Napier said today about those two. So an interesting press conference, considering that that college football and the powers that be in college football have completely ruined National Signing Day in February. It used to be a holiday where I considered taking off the day of work. And even if I was at work, I was sitting there hitting refresh on whatever website I followed at the time to know who was signing. I mean, I can remember, the 2006 class and just refresh to see who all was coming in, make sure the faxes from Brandon Spikes and Tebow and Harvin all came in, and then just Urban Meyer sort of adding to that class over and over and over again throughout the day. You just don't have that anymore. The drama is all in December when everything else is going on in college football as well. So if nothing else, the press conference gave us a couple of little nuggets, and I'm fascinated to see how it turns out. Again, I think I would probably do things differently, but I have a lot of respect for somebody who says this is how we're going to do it and just decides to do it that way. We'll see. Right? If the offense sits there and is 50th again in yards per play, like it's been the last 2 years, well, they better have a top 10 or top 20 defense, because otherwise with the schedule, it's going to be lights out. and that's just sort of the way things are at this point, is they're putting an awful lot on they're betting an awful lot on defensive improvement unless the offense can take some major step forward. And, I haven't seen evidence thus far that the offense is going to take a major step forward. That was always the hope for the offensive coordinator, but obviously doesn't look like we're going from outside the program. And hey, we'll see. We'll evaluate, right? That's read and reaction. That's what that's about, man. As we see what's going on, we make some predictions and then we tell you why it did or didn't work. And if this works out, I will be the first one to give Napier a whole lot of credit for sticking to his guns. In fact, I'm giving him credit now for sticking to his guns. It's just that he's going to be responsible for whatever comes out of those weapons when we go watch what's going on game day. Whether it's good or bad, Billy Napier at this point, there's no doubt he's the one who's responsible. And, that'll sort of seal his fate one way or the other. And if things go really well, then, I think Napier can be in Gainesville for a really, really, really long time. If things go poorly, then obviously, there's a contingent, and I think I would probably agree with them that you're better off making starting over.
Yeah, one point about Billy Napier and the offensive coordinator conversation, winning some ball games eliminates this conversation entirely. It just you're not going to hear it anymore if you win a few ball games. Well,
you mean you got to beat Arkansas? Yeah, that would be the way to go.
Be a start. Be a start.
You can't have a bad loss every year. So especially with the schedule, right? The Arkansas loss, 5 straight losses to end the year, leaves a nasty taste in everybody's mouth. And now we're staring at 5 straight losses to end the 2024 season if things aren't going very well either. And that's just the reality of things. Is the schedule's brutal. Scott Strickland, for some reason, scheduled Miami as a home game to start the year when Florida State is a road game. So, and you've got UCF on the schedule as well. So you don't even have the 2 cupcakes you normally have. UCF, they have KJ Jefferson. So we get to see that guy again after he absolutely torched Florida last year. So he's not going to be intimidated playing this Gators defense. He's done that before. So look, I think Florida's got a really rough schedule to roll through, but you're right. I mean, look, if he goes 8-4, I think we're all going to sit there and say, wow, what an improvement. Like, wow, what progress has been made. If he goes 5-7, I think we're going to sit there and go, well, you've missed a bowl game 2 out of the 3 years you've been here, and the one bowl game you did go to was an embarrassment, and they got destroyed. What are we really holding on to? And then obviously the floor is, you go 2-10, 3-9, and you got to have some really, really hard discussions at that point. So, we'll see. I mean, again, I think there is no doubt that Billy Napier deserved a third year, and we're going to be able to evaluate the success of the program at this point pretty thoroughly because it's his players, right? From the transfer portal, from recruiting, he's manipulated his coaching staff in multiple places in multiple years, right? I mean, that Roberts is essentially the third defensive coordinator that they've had in 3 years. There's been a lot of manipulation, a lot of change. At this point, this is Billy Napier's program, and 2024 will tell us a lot about the status of that program and the health of that program.
Yeah, moving on here, Will. Some sad news this week. People who go back to the 1980s in their Gator fandom here will know these names pretty well. But Bill Carr, former athletic director, passed away. He also started for the Gators at center. He's an All-American in the mid-1960s, played with Steve Spurrier, his roommate, roomed with Spurrier. That was something I learned this week, Will. I did not know he was the roommate of Steve Spurrier. During Spurrier's Heisman campaign, he was Spurrier center there. So that Gators team in '66, of course, heartbreaker to Georgia, and then they end up they end up winning the Orange Bowl. So he was part of some good teams under Ray Graves. Uh, Spurrier was quoted this week in Scott Carter's article. His teammates called him Willie C, and he loved his school and everyone around him. We loved him back, and all of us have many wonderful memories of Bill. So Carr, interesting note, Will, here he became the athletic director in early 1979, shortly after Charlie Pell was hired, and Pell reported directly to the president too. So that was an unusual arrangement. But the athletic department at the time in the late 70s, and this is something that I dug into the Charlie Pell years, and this was something I heard that was echoed frequently throughout from those times, that they were $700,000 in the red at in the Gators athletic department. And so 7 years later, when he stepped down, the financial situation looked a lot different. They had an operating budget of $13 million. So yeah, another thing Bill Carr is known for is ushering Florida through some of those tough times with the NCAA. He was seen as separate from a lot of that situation with the football program, since he was not involved in the direct reporting there. And former Gators athletic director Jeremy Foley, who worked under Carr at the start of his career, reflected on Carr's impact as well within Carter's article. He said, Bill Carr was a wonderful man and a great Gator. I'm very saddened by his passing and wish to send my condolences to his entire family. Bill's fingerprints are all over the foundation of this program, and I had a front row seat to witness his impact and vision during his time as athletic director, especially in the area of facilities. He was one of my first mentors, and he had a huge impact on my career. I was so blessed to be on his staff. I will forever be grateful for the opportunities he gave me, as he changed my life by trusting and believing in me at a very young age. So Carr later went to serve as AD at Houston, started a consulting firm with coaching searches, and he was also a big supporter of the Gainesville Quarterback Club, Will, and you had a chance to meet him.
Yeah, actually twice. So I've been down there and talked to the Gainesville Quarterback Club a couple of times. First time I talked down there, he came up to me. I didn't know who he was. On me, right? I'm just not aware of the history really for Florida that far back. The program, my youth, I was born in 1981, so the '84 season wasn't exactly in my purview, especially since I wasn't born in Florida. But came up to me. He was really complimentary of the talk, and then wanted to help us out, help out the website in any way he could. And I gave me his business card. I emailed him afterwards. He emailed right back words of encouragement, and it was sort of nice. We had a little bit of a conversation going back and forth, and then you came up with me to the quarterback club a couple of years ago, and he came up and had glowing things to say about Billy Napier at the time. He had met him, and just in passing, and had really nice things to say about him. And I think, the prevailing thing that you heard from people at the quarterback club, and really sort of what we experienced, I think, is just Bill Carr's a really real genuine guy. He was somebody who was Florida through and through, wanted to see Florida do well. And was willing to listen to anybody, regardless of, whether it was us who are just sort of, a startup who has maybe a voice on the periphery, or, people who are heavily checked into the program. And, he was always looking for information, looking for ways to improve. And that was sort of what came across when we talked to him. So, really genuine guy, somebody who I think was just bought into the Florida program overall. Obviously lived in Gainesville, for the last years of his life, and Gainesville was a big part of his life, and contributed a lot to the university, not just as the athletic director, but just from the standpoint of being a supporter of the university. You see folks who get dismissed from universities. We've seen this the last couple of years. Dan Mullen, he has not shied away from taking shots at different things Florida related. Carr was released amongst, or let go or resigned amidst some circumstances that could have left him bitter, and certainly could have left the program pointing fingers. But instead, obviously living in Gainesville, being involved with the program, was able to sort of bridge that gap and be a huge supporter of the program overall. So a big loss for Gator Nation, big loss for the quarterback club. And, I'm glad I met him. I'm glad we had that experience, and just sort of reinforces everything everybody said about him this week.
Yeah, we extend our condolences to the Carr family as well. I believe his son Scott's the AD down at FIU right now as well. So I know still an active family in this field. So yeah, big time Gator passing away there this week. Another Gator from that era, Alonzo Johnson, surprisingly passed away. He's an unknown medical issue, apparently 60 years old this past week. He earned an All-American, All-SEC selection. So in 1984, 1985, you just mentioned that 84 team. Well, he was a big part of those teams. He finished his college career with 335 tackles, 55 tackles for a loss, and 27 sacks. Ended up going on to play for the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFL. His impact at Florida was later recognized. By the way, this is from a Scott Carter article as well, FloridaGators.com, Scott Carter. I want to credit that. His impact was later recognized when he was voted onto the Gators all-century team, an all-time team, as well as in his induction into the University of Florida Athletic Hall of Fame as a Gator great in 2006. So his 27 sacks stood as the program record until Alex Brown finished his career in 2001 with 33. And Johnson just had a stellar career here at Florida before going on to the league. Well, I think he only played a couple of years in the NFL, but really remembered by teammate here, Patrick Miller, from a fellow teammate from those mid 80s teams. He said Zoe was the man, and we depended on him a lot. He's probably one of the best. I was talking to Vernell Brown today, and Vernell said there is no other athlete in America I know that could do the things that Alonzo could do. So surprising passing here, 60 years old, Will. This is one of those guys from that 1984 team that won the first ever SEC championship in Florida football history.
Yeah, those 84 and 85 teams were really, really good. Obviously, sort of set the stage for Steve Spurrier taking over in late 1989. Had some run-ins with the NCAA, though with NIL and all the stuff that's going on now, those run-ins seem kind of like small potatoes. And certainly the SEC, if you're not cheating, you're not trying moniker is really sort of applicable to the SEC. I know Florida has always wanted to be above that, but still, those 84 and 85 teams were really, really good. Bear Bryant always talked about Florida being a sleeping giant. I think 84 and 85 were really sort of the first time you started to see that, and fans who grew up and were there at Florida during that time certainly, I think, see that as sort of the first, the beginning of the renaissance of what was going to come in the 1990s and then in the 2000s under Urban Meyer. Alonzo Johnson, obviously a big part of that. Like you mentioned, two-time All-American, so he's got two bricks out there in the University of Florida Athletic Hall of Fame, ranked in the top 100 Gators of the first century by the Gainesville Sun. So, again, for a lot of us, especially people my age, the University of Florida history kind of starts with Steve Spurrier, but that's not really accurate. The University of Florida history starts a lot sooner in terms of what was built um, into the Spurrier era, and I think these guys really sort of paved the way. Alonzo Johnson was a big part of that, and so it's a big loss for the Florida family, big loss for those teams specifically. And it's one of those things. Time marches on. You know what I mean? And it does indicate to me we got to appreciate the guys who are around right now from that '84 team, because we're going to hear more of this. I mean, obviously 60 is young, but it's not beyond the realm of possibilities to pass away at 60. And so those guys in the '84 team, if you have an opportunity, those people, you've got the ability to reach out to them. Certainly, I think telling them that you appreciate what they've done for the university is a big deal, because that is a big part of Florida's history.
I'm glad you said that, Will, because I know it seems like from an outside perspective, what happened throughout the 90s is we kind of wanted to slowly separate from those times in the 80s. We wanted to have a distinction, and there definitely was in a lot of ways. And I can understand where in the moment that might have been the right thing to do to create some separation, show that there's a new way of doing things around here in terms of the overall program and how the overall program was run. I can understand the need for that in the moment, but it seems like there's just been a lot of years that have gone by, and I don't feel like that '84 team has really gotten the love and appreciation they deserve, and that's something that uh, it is disappointing because you look at it, and again, not to be morbid with it, but the reality is nobody's getting younger here, so it's like you can the NCAA can make whatever ruling they want, the SEC can make whatever ruling they want, but there's no rule saying that Florida and the fans and the program can't express appreciation for what the players on the field accomplished in that season, especially when you consider the fact, well, you go through the first 20 years of the SEC. Florida did not have a winning record in the league in the first 20 years in the conference. And then you go through the 50s, not so pretty. Very, very much in the middle to the lower third. The 60s, you got Graves coming in, had some competitive teams, but you had a couple of years where you're actually a serious threat. Didn't quite get it done. Dickey had a couple shots at it, but that's about it. In 9 seasons at the helm, and then Pelgett comes in, and those teams actually get it done in '84. And that '85 team is the first team to ever be ranked number 1 in school history. So a lot of history with those groups of players that I don't feel like it's fully appreciated in the story of Florida football.
Yeah, I mean, you look at those old Southern Cal teams with Reggie Bush, and they took away his Heisman
Ridiculous.
and different things that
Yeah.
they've done from a sanctions perspective to the program, forced USC to separate themselves from Reggie Bush, and in many ways, I think probably is reflective of the same type of thing, right? That happened to Florida in the late '80s. Now, the issue that I have with it is that the kids who were there, who enjoyed the games when USC was winning titles and winning the Pac-12. Like to me, it's not going to diminish the experience, because college football is an experience. It's tailgating, it's family, it's
Mhm.
it's it's knowing that you're going to call your brother or your dad after the game and talk about it, and that experience. You can't take that experience away. So no one who was there in '84 or '85 should feel guilty about rooting for the team in '84 or '85. And quite honestly, the toll that the game takes on your body is just as relevant for all the people who are playing in '84 and '85, probably even more so than it is for kids who are playing today. So, I just look at it and say, yes, we should honor our history regardless of the flaws, because there are going to be imperfect people in 1984, and there's going to be imperfect people in 2006, and there's imperfect people in 2024. And so honor your history from the standpoint of these guys did do something at Florida that other people hadn't done. And it's worth celebrating it, and worth at least making sure that we mention it, because Florida's program didn't start in 1990, and it didn't jump from Steve Spurrier winning the Heisman to 1990. There's a whole lot of work that had to be done to build. So, like you mentioned, Carr, getting the athletic department out of debt. That's a huge, huge part of all of what Florida's been able to do, because Florida now has a budget that's way bigger than Florida State's. And so there has been, we call Florida the everything school, winning national championships and all sorts of different sports. That is all possible because the football program drives revenue that then gets distributed amongst all those other sports. And the genesis of that really is the 1980s, where Florida got its financial ducks in a row and was able to push things forward. So, look, we stand on the shoulders of people who've come before us. And if we don't acknowledge that we're standing on their shoulders, then it just cheapens it. And so that's not to say that the shoulders aren't flawed, but the shoulders are there and we don't really have a choice. And when it's the University of Florida, Bill Carr and Zoe Johnson, those are guys who contributed. Those are guys whose shoulders the university's standing on. And so we should certainly take time to acknowledge it, say thank you, and certainly send our condolences to the families.
That's a great way to wrap that up. Let's move on here, Will. Yahoo Sports reporting that SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey and Big Ten Commissioner Tony Petitti, for the first time, have publicly expressed doubts in their commitment to the future of the college football playoff if the leaders can't, quote unquote, get right a litany of issues when it comes to on the heels of an announcement on Friday that the leagues were forming a joint advisory board to study the future of college athletics. Well, what do you think get right means from the SEC and Big Ten perspective?
Well, first off, nothing says college football more than forming a committee to study how to get right, quote unquote. Um, get right is get the hell out of the way and let us pay our players, but not get sued. So the SEC and the Big Ten, I think, have recognized that the NCAA, if it's going to come in and arbitrarily try to enforce NIL rules, is a hindrance, not a help. And before it was like, hey, the NCAA gives us some cover to be able to do this and not necessarily have to give up our TV money. But the NCAA is so incompetent that now they've even got Tennessee and Virginia suing them. There was a temporary restraining order that got overruled, but that overruling actually is worse for the NCAA because it basically says that if the NCAA goes after them and then they're found to be restraining trade through antitrust law, then they'll be responsible for monetary damages.
Mm.
So nothing puckers up the NCAA more than telling them they're going to be responsible for monetary damages. They did that with the Ed O'Bannon trial, realized that was bad, and all of a sudden NCAA football went away because that's how the NCAA reacts to things, is they sort of go into a shell and decide, oh, no, we're not going to have that product. So basically the Big Ten and the SEC are saying, no, you don't get to go into a shell here. We're going to take over. And that's what's happening. So we got the AFC and the NFC. One of them's going to snap up UNLV, like I've been talking about for months now. And we're going to have these giant conferences that separate from the schools and basically lease the rights to use the logos and the names and the stadiums and all that sort of stuff. And you're essentially looking at minor league football where they're going to have collective bargaining with the players, and that's coming, man. It's just a question of when. And when you say get right, what you're really saying is that there are teams in each conference that don't like that there are other teams in their conferences who have a major competitive advantage. And so they're going to try to restrict that competitive advantage in some capacity.
2 words: revenue distribution. Will, that's what I believe get right means. Revenue distribution. What's our take and how can we improve it? There right now, the contract for the college football playoff runs through 2025. So there's 2024 and 2025 on the table. And after that, it's wide open. So I think these are your two new behemoths, like you call them, the NFC and AFC. They're flexing their muscles here, and they're letting people know that we are going to get together on this here, and we're going to get what's coming for us, because there's also guaranteed playoff spots that are up for discussion. Like, I know right now, I believe it's six. What is it? For the automatic spots, it's the 6 highest ranked conference champions and the at-large spots to the next 6 highest ranked teams. So like this year, like I believe I want to say Oklahoma is ranked 12th. They would not have gotten into the playoffs. Liberty would have been the one that to get in over Oklahoma because they were the sixth ranked highest ranked conference champion. So it's right now. I think the schools are looking at that. The SEC would probably not be too thrilled if Oklahoma was going home and Liberty were getting in. So I think there's some of those types of rules that they want to flex their muscles on here before they agree to anything going forward.
I mean, I think they'll flex there, but I think the reality is what they're seeing is that the NCAA is incompetent, that the NCAA is like bringing on legislation or not legislation, bringing on litigation that they don't need to bring on by trying to enforce these NIL rules. And so they're trying to get them out because the NIL, I've been saying this now for years. NIL is a way for colleges to not give up their TV revenue to the players because they figured out a way to get their fans to pay for the players. And they've found a new revenue source that I'm not sure they really thought was going to be there. And it's turned into this arms race and with the transfer portal and all that sort of stuff. And you can like it or not like it, but that's the way it is at this point. And with the NCAA coming in and rattling its saber on Florida and Tennessee and some other schools in terms of, well, you used it as an inducement. Of course you did. Of course it was an inducement. We knew it was going to be inducement the entire time. The only question was it an inducement or was it a quote unquote inducement? Like, is it in the contract and can you prove it? And you're basically just asking people to look the other way and say, no, it's not an inducement. I really am advertising for the pizza place down the street for $30 million. Like, look, it's an inducement. It's pay for play. It always has been ever since this got instituted. And the fact that the NCAA is trying to pretend like they can enforce this without bringing on litigation that's going to just destroy the entire model, or at least it's going to completely reset the entire model. And I said this a couple of months ago, the entire strategy for conference commissioners and the NCAA in terms of calling guys student athletes for years, in terms of not having them be qualified as employees, in terms of opening up NIL once it became very, very clear that the Supreme Court was going to rule against them, all of those things tied together have been a way of delaying sharing TV money with the players because the people in charge will be retired by the time they actually have to share TV money with the players. So the SEC and Big Ten just got together and said, hey, the NCAA being an umbrella over us used to be protective, but they're so stupid that it's not protective anymore. And we're going to get something shoved right down our throats that we don't like if we don't control it. So what they're going to do is they're essentially going to take over and then they'll own the litigation and they'll get to decide when do they stop and when do they decide to collectively bargain and how do they manage the relationship with the players and all that sort of stuff. And unfortunately, those are some really shrewd business people in those conferences, and they're going to find a way to screw the players is what'll end up happening downstream. And we saw that very early on with the NFL and the players union there. The baseball union's always been the strongest union. The NFL, those players have gotten taken advantage of, didn't have guaranteed contracts, all those sorts of things for a really, really long time. Took them a while to really build in protections for the players. I'm afraid that'll happen for the players in college, but that's sort of the direction we're heading at this point.
It'll be interesting to watch. Lot of moving pieces here. Will, the 49ers are in Vegas for the Super Bowl. Their practice field, they said their practice field is not very good this week. Where are they practicing?
UNLV, baby.
UNLV. There you go. There's
Well,
your
but the
UNLV.
practice, so no. You can't do that because the NFL came in and installed a grass field on top of their turf field. And that's why it's too soft. This isn't a UNLV screw up. This is the NFL screwing up. I'm telling you right now, Las Vegas, the college football powers that be are going to want something in Las
Oh, a guy
Vegas.
in
They're
Philadelphia
coming in.
bitching about the Super Bowl turf. That's original. Didn't hear that all last February.
I
That's
could care
new.
less about the Eagles. Slip all over the place. I enjoy making fun of my friends who still complain about it.
Hey, this is a true story. When I was in high school, I went to Bartram Trail in Jacksonville. The New England Patriots practice at our high school for the Super Bowl, and at the time we just knew the AFC team was going to practice there. But they actually came in. They redid the whole field at Bartram there, and we played on that field. We played on that field all year, man. So I can tell you the NFL does a good job on their field as well.
Well,
Maybe it's UNLV.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I had I had a joke that's inappropriate that I'll hold on to and tell you afterwards.
So excited to hear about that. All right. It's the first step to potential employee status for college athletes, says Gabe Feldman, a sports law professor at Tulane. This past week here, National Labor Relations Board regional office ruled that Dartmouth basketball are employees of the school, clearing the way for an election that would create the first ever labor union for NCAA athletes. Will, I'm sure we all have this pegged to start with Dartmouth basketball, but look, overall, Will, this is something that is being watched across the country because this is could be the first case here cutting into the question of amateurism. To me, I think this is a direction we're heading anyway overall. So this could be the first of many. Did a similar thing did happen at Northwestern, but there was a complication with the Northwestern case. Northwestern's a private school. Things work differently with the public schools in terms of being able to call the athletes employees. So the reason why this is relevant here for the Ivy League is that all the Ivy League schools are private. So if you can do this at one private school, you can take this across the board pretty quickly in the Ivy League. Uh, so it's not quite going to translate exactly to like the SEC, for example, but it's at least a step in that direction.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see what happens here. I think one of the things that you risk when you unionize is if you're not actually worth very much, then your employer decides, I don't need you anymore.
Yep.
And I'm very curious as to how valuable the Ivy League feels that its sports programs are to its overall mission and vision and where it wants to go. Those places have huge endowments, so the money probably wouldn't be an issue there. The question becomes, do they value the sports programs and do they want the headaches that go along with it? You know, years ago, the Ivies were dominant when it came to college football, and they decided to take a step back for various reasons, but mostly academic ones. And I can envision a scenario where they would do that again. So, look, if the Florida players unionized, I think the university would find that it would be very difficult to just say, well, we're going to disband the football program. Certainly in Alabama, that wouldn't happen. But I don't know whether that'll happen in the Ivies. I think the other interesting thing is, look, this is New Hampshire. One of the reasons that the union stuff didn't go with Northwestern is because you're sitting in Illinois, and so this is kind of a state by state type of thing. It's going to have to cascade its whole way through. If you've enjoyed the NIL mess, then this is only going to exacerbate that because the NIL stuff was state by state. And now this with the National Labor Relations Board is going to be state by state as it goes across. There's some talk that Congress is going to get involved and pass some legislation for this sort of stuff, which maybe hastens it and sort of brings stuff in the right place. I got to be honest, if you don't like labor law and you don't like players being paid, or at least you don't like the unevenness of the players being paid right now, you probably just ought to stop watching college football for about 5 years and come back, and everything will be settled. And we'll know where it all sits and where it all settles out. What I can tell you is the lawyers will make an enormous amount of money off of all of this stuff, probably more than the players do. And at the end of the day, we're going to have some arrangement where you've got employees who are getting paid to play. Now, the problem is, and this has been something I think this is even true at Florida, is the third string left tackle probably isn't really worth a scholarship. That's probably overpaying when it comes to the amount of money you actually put into that player versus the value you get off on the value you get from him on the field. And so that's the thing, is that the employees who are the stars, the Patrick Mahomeses of the world of college football, the Tim Tebow's of the world, will clean up when it comes to being an employee of an organization. But the question I have is the kids who have gotten scholarships to maybe a group of five type of place, or kids who are backups or even third string at some of these schools that maybe aren't the blue bloods. What happens to them if they're classified as employees? Would you just expand your walk-on program, right? And say, look, it's walk-on, it's volunteer, it's not, it's not employee. I have zero doubt that college football programs will find a way to gain an edge by manipulating the budget that they have and their employee status to bring in volunteers to help. There's going to be a lot of goofy shenanigans that go on over the next few years, but this is the first step, man. Like, it is a big deal to have players classified as employees because for two reasons. One is the compensation aspect of it, but the other is the retirement and the injury protections that go along with that. So you think about the NFL and all the concussions and all this and all that sort of stuff. Well, that's going to start to open up the universities to the liability associated with an employee getting injured while they're playing a sport. And so, we're going to have to watch that aspect as well because all the workers' comp, the disability, all that sort of stuff, they've been able to avoid all of those expenses because there isn't any workman's comp or disability for student athletes. There will be for employees. And so there's a whole list of things that get brought to the table when this happens and how they manage it and how it rolls across the country is going to be fascinating. I don't think any of us know where it's going to end up, but it's changing. I mean, I tweeted this the other day that, we went from, it took 50 years or 100 years to go from student athlete to NIL. It's taken 2.5 years to go from NIL to employee. And so there's a lot of change going on in the college football landscape. That's for sure.
I think a lot of this needs to come in-house anyway. I don't like all the third-party collectives. It's like you and I have said too, the NIL structure it's a joke right now where I do understand that like you just look at the thing, throw your hands up and go, it is what it is sometimes at the moment. But even for protection with the players, right? Like that to make sure that players can't get cut off overnight, or there's going to be all kinds of stories that come out in the next few years about, maybe a different group didn't live up to their commitments on with this player or that player, or a player took off in the transfer portal after getting X from a certain group. So both sides, it really, both sides are so vulnerable right now. And I don't think the proper representation is out there for these players too. So dealing with the schools probably better than dealing with an external party. And if you have to be classified as employees to make that work, like figure it out. But this is what I absolutely hate. I hate that this conversation is starting with Dartmouth basketball because Dartmouth's already made it clear we lose money on this program. And right now, you don't go to Dartmouth to play basketball and make a ton of money. You are good enough to play some basketball and you get an Ivy League education on the side. That's a pretty good deal. You're doing pretty
You do
well
it to
for
make a ton
yourself.
of money, but not playing basketball.
You're right. You're doing pretty well for yourself if you're doing that. And I think that this is a conversation that needs to be had in high level college, men's college basketball specifically, and high level college football. That's where this conversation needs to exist. Because if you take it to this level, to Dartmouth basketball, well, and no disrespect to the fine folks at Dartmouth hoops here, but if you take it to this level, what I worry about is think about all the programs you have. Like the track and field program doesn't make a lot of money. The women's softball team at a lot of schools not make a lot of money. A lot of these programs are in place because of the money that is shared in revenue from the sports that do make money, like football and men's basketball. And that's just the reality of the situation on college campuses. But you're able to put on these sports that lose money because of the sports that make the money. And I think if you turn it into a thing where all the outflow is going, all the expense and is the expense is going even more into these sports from the schools or from whatever source, you're going to look at that basketball program that's losing money and say, it's a club sport now, or it's something like that. If maybe some schools aren't going to want to deal with this, and
So,
that's what there might not be the appetite to support some of these programs. And I'm not really talking about basketball might be a bad example, but let's say you have a baseball program that's holding on by a thread. You saw what happened to like my understanding with college, I'm not a big wrestling buff, so forgive me if I'm butchering this detail, but my understanding is that a lot more schools had men's college wrestling programs. And then when Title IX came in and you had to clear up space for a lot of the women's scholarships, because my understanding of Title IX is got to offer equal number of scholarships. And so the women's sports, there's usually more women's sports at the different schools. college wrestling was one of the sports on the men's side that took a huge hit because that was an easy program to cut. And that became more of a club sport in a lot of schools. I know there's some schools like Iowa and some of the Big Ten schools, they stuck with it, but a lot of schools it's just a club sport. So are we headed that direction with some of these middle ground sports or Olympic sports? We don't know. It could really change the game across all the college sports landscape and not just football and basketball.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there are concerns anytime there's change. Certainly, organizations have to make choices of what to do with their revenue. And at this point, colleges have brought in that revenue and have decided to invest in sports that are generally non-revenue generating. This doesn't preclude them from doing that. It just adds a cost center to the university that wasn't there before, and they have to figure out how to manage that. Now, how do professional sports leagues manage that? Like the NBA subsidized the WNBA for a very long time, and I don't know if the WNBA is still profitable. I'm not sure,
No, I
but
don't I don't think it's ever been profitable. I
so
think it's
again,
completely subsidized by the NBA.
So again, the NBA has made a business decision that that is a good thing to subsidize. Whether the reason they're doing it is up to them, but they've made that business decision. And so I expect that to be the same way that colleges are going to operate is they'll make business decisions based on how big the budget is, how big the budget has to be for college football or college basketball, and then they will navigate funds to the other places as needed. I mean, I think what they'll find is a lot of the NIL dollars will probably flow towards those non-revenue generating sports because the people who are giving to endowments, the people who are giving to athletic programs, that's not going to stop. What's going to happen is some of the TV revenue, so like the the Ivy League right now gets some cut of the NCAA tournament money, right? Because the Ivy participates in that and they get an automatic bid for winning, and
Mhm.
or the winner of the conference gets an automatic bid, and then they split that money amongst the conference. Well, should that be spent on basketball alone? Maybe, which means, yeah, you're going to have to decide what what am I going to do with it? But right now that TV money gets diverted in other places. So you got to do better fundraising. I think that's the reality. It's just things are going to change. And the more you resist the change and go, oh, I wish it would go back to the way it was, the less successful you're going to be because things always change and you sort of have to deal with it. And we talked about it from a recruiting perspective a few weeks ago where Lane Kiffin is putting adapt or die on X, and he's completely changed his approach, especially to the transfer portal. And I think we're going to see in 2024 that pay off for him. And whereas there have been some other folks, Billy Napier, one of them, who's been slower to adapt to the changing landscape of college football. And I think that's impacted his program in a way that's negative, at least compared to Kiffin. It's going to be the same way at all of these programs. They're going to have to make decisions. They're going to have to make choices. And let's be honest, go look at the college presidents and the college ADs' salaries and tell me that they shouldn't have to make hard decisions. The reality is they get paid enough money that they should be able to do this, that they're running businesses at this point, and they've just got a new line item, and that line item is going to be the expense of the players. But it's not as though they don't have workers' comp and disability for all the professors, and they don't have those things for all the people who work at the food service jobs on campus and the utility jobs on campus and all the other things that have to be done on campus. They have an entire apparatus to pay employees. They just have to bring these folks into that same apparatus, and it's another line item in the budget. They'll figure out how to make it work because there's enough money in sports that they can't give that up. So even at the Ivy League level, and look, I think the education you get at the Ivy League school is worth more than the scholarship, not more than the scholarship. I mean, the scholarship is the education, right? But the education you get in the Ivy League probably is more valuable, just on a dollar for dollar basis than an education at, say, Alabama or Ole Miss. But it doesn't really matter. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still a line item at Alabama or a line item at Dartmouth, and these guys are going to figure out how to deal with it.
My gut instinct says the winners of this are going to win big, and the losers, it's going to be tough for some of the
My gut instinct
people on the
says that
short end of the stick here. It's
I
just
think
some people are
I think the
definitely going to get screwed, I
administrators and
think.
the lawyers are going to make out like bandits, and I
Yeah.
think the players are going to have face an uphill battle to get what's really theirs. And that's the shame to me is if the players because they have to unionize state by state, because it's like a Dartmouth union, and then it'll be a Penn union, and then it'll be a Harvard union. There won't be a whole lot of collective bargaining power. Like, think about the SEC, right? If the players at Florida decided they wanted to hold the SEC's feet to the fire, the SEC will crush them. Like, the players are going to have to band together in a way that gives them equal power to the conferences. And I'm just not sure that's going to happen, at least not right off the bat.
Yeah, but again, you might have the power to do that in a sport like football, but try that in another sport. There's a lot of other sports that go on. I'm just thinking about, this is more of a, I know we're a football show, but this is more of like a full
Well,
scale
the
athletic
whole
department conversation.
the whole landscape is changing, and it
Yeah.
impacts football in a way, and impacts Florida in a way that's relevant. I think the um, the thing that I look at is Florida is in a good position from the standpoint of the SEC is one of the main movers in all of this. I'd be really worried if I was Florida State, and I was texting back and forth with my uncle who's a Virginia Tech alum, and obviously I am too. And we're talking about the Hokies, and we're sitting there going, geez, Florida State needs to win this lawsuit against the ACC to get out of that grant of rights fee, because all those ACC teams are not going to be wanted in whatever the Big Ten and the SEC decide to form, which means you're going to have stragglers who are going to try to hold Florida State, hold Virginia Tech, hold some of those other programs in. And I'm concerned that if the ACC just sort of sits there as a separate entity, it's going to turn into like what the Big Eight was years ago, right? Where it took a long time for anybody other than Oklahoma and Texas to be relevant in that general region of the country. And we've seen conferences rise and fall. The Big East is a great example of a conference that rose and fell over the course of the last 20 or 30 years, and 40 years probably now. But those things happen, and so the ACC is in danger of that. So that's the good news for Florida. Is Florida's sitting right in the sweet spot of even for Rutgers. Rutgers is in a much better position right now than Florida State. Rutgers is in a much better position than NC State or North Carolina, just because of the way the contract's set up and because Rutgers is in the Big Ten. Maryland, same way. Getting out of the ACC years ago to get into the Big Ten is going to be the best thing they ever did for their program. And, so again, when we talk about this, the whole landscape's changing, but thankfully Florida's in a position to be able to take advantage and be standing with the big boys when everything settles.
Lot of moving and shakings, like you said. Get ready for this ride for the next several years, as if it's not already been a ride for the last several years. It's going to be the decade. Let's just chalk it up to the rest of the decade here before you see any sense of settling in. But a lot of questions to be answered for 2026 and beyond in college sports, and I think this labor discussion is going to be a big part of it. That's all we got for tonight, everybody. We appreciate you tuning in to another episode of Stand Up and Holler. Will, you want to give the folks another magazine reminder here?
Yeah, if you're interested in advertising, will at readingreaction.com. Happy to send you a media kit. Happy to talk to you specifically about what your needs are and make something work. And hopefully some folks, we've already had plenty of people reach out to us. We appreciate the people who already have, but we've still got space. And, obviously it's going to be a Father's Day gift that a lot of people are going to buy. And we're going to be investing on advertising, investing on printing, investing in a lot of different places to make sure this reaches the maximum number of people possible. We're excited about that distribution, but we want to bring along some people who are hardcore Gator fans and hardcore Read and Reaction fans as well. We think we've got something in this magazine that's differentiated. We think we've got a differentiated voice in the marketplace. And so, if you've got a business that you want to differentiate, we think this is a way for you to do that. So we'd appreciate you reaching out. Again, will at readingreaction.com, or you can get me at Will Miles SEC on X and reach out there as well.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Enjoy your week. For Will Miles, I'm Nick Knudsen. Go Gators.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Stand Up and Holler. If you're interested in more information from me and Nick, you can go over to readingreaction.com. You can like and subscribe our YouTube channel here at Read and Reaction, or you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction to support us, get extra information, and we do Ask Anythings over there every once in a while as well. So check us out. Thanks for listening.